Jorge Luis Borges posits, or describes, a library composed of an indefinite, perhaps infinite, number of hexagonal galleries, the arrangement of which is always the same, containing all books. All, writes Borges, the detailed history of the future, the autobiographies of the archangels, the faithful catalog of the library, thousands and thousands of false catalogs, the proof of the falsity of those false catalogs, a proof of the falsity of the true catalog, the Gnostic Gospel of Basilides, the commentary upon that gospel, the commentary on that gospel, the true story of your death, the translation of every book into every language, the interpolations of every book into all books, the treatise Bede could have written but did not on the mythology of the Saxon people, the lost books of Tacitus, and on and on. Borges is playing on the metaphysical implications of the imaginative possibility of literature, but also in literalizing the metaphor, suggesting something more, that there is another dimension of reality, a place of pure language, an infinite and ideal plane in which the recursive potential of embodied spirit made manifest in text endlessly plays itself, endlessly fulfills itself, endlessly unfolds, endlessly new and new and new. Patricia Lockwood's writing, I suspect, comes from this realm of pure language, this library of Babel, in which the usual relationship between sign, signifier, and referent is scrambled. The sign is real, and it's the referent that's arbitrary. Lockwood writes in a poem titled "The Cartoon's Mother Builds a House in Hammerspace," she keeps a Bible by her bedside called Parallel Worlds for Children. It begins, imagine a stair tree, nearly as wide as it is tall, with ripe, clear chandeliers hanging among the leaves. Imagine that the tree is hollow, and imagine that a bolt of lightning strikes permanently down the middle in steps, and it does not hurt you to climb them. This is your house. You live there. There is a quality in her work, like those old Merry Melodies cartoons, where the books come to life. But instead of three little women singing and dancing off the cover of Louisa May Alcott's novel, it's the work of Carson McCullers, Vladimir Nabokov, Lucia Berlin, and Marian Engel in Lockwood's literary criticism. Or leprechauns and turtlenecks and Marmaduke and Popeye and Grecian urns in her tweets and poems. Or the internet, as she calls it, the portal, in her novel No One Is Talking About This. She writes, "She opened the portal and the mind met her more than halfway. Inside it was tropical and snowing, and the first flake of the blizzard of everything landed on her tongue and melted." She writes, "A leprechaun sits in a pot of gold. He removes gold pieces one by one to reveal his nudity. At the end, he tears off his beard. It's a woman." She writes, "I always had trouble listening and remembering, trouble hearing people when they explained simple facts to me. When I read, my head seemed to go diagonal, and I swore I saw things in sentences, not what I was supposed to see. When I read the words moonlit swim, I saw the moonlight slicked all over the bare skin. The word sunshine had a washed look with the sweep of a rag in the middle of it. The word violinist was a fig cut in half. It was as if I could read the surface of the words, but not their information. When I read, the meaning swam, and the images leaped out, and the words gave up their doubles. When I wrote, the same thing happened with the paper." She writes, "She spoke the words that were there for her to speak. She wore the only kind of shirt available at that time. It was not possible to see where she had gone wrong, where she would go wrong. She said, Garfield is a body positivity icon. She said, Abraham Lincoln is daddy. She said, the eels in London are on cocaine." It was fitting, finally, to appear in that place, collaged together in body and mind, and speak about the liftedness of little and large things. The great mystery of literature is how spirit is transubstantiated into flesh, into text, then back. Soul to hand to words, words to eyes to soul. It isn't just these moments of translation and metamorphosis that we might glimpse, if only fleetingly, the leaves unfolding infinitely within the Library of Babel, the infinitely new potential of everything we are and are not, and have been and will never be. Somehow these marks and noises connect us, transform us, lift us up out of ourselves and into something more monstrous, more wicked, more sublime, more beautiful, more human. Patricia Lockwood is more than just a writer. She's a priest, come to initiate us into these mysteries. Lockwood is the author of more than 20,000 tweets and 4 books, including the 2021 novel No One Is Talking About This, an international bestseller, winner of the Dylan Thomas Prize, finalist for the Booker Prize and the Women's Prize for Fiction, translated into 20 languages. Her 2017 memoir, Priest Daddy, won the Thurber Prize for American Humor and was named one of The Guardian's 100 best books of the 21st century. Already, right? She's got that locked down. She also has 2 poetry collections, Motherland, Fatherland, Homeland, Sexuals from 2014 and Balloon Pop Outlaw Black from 2012. Lockwood is the only writer with both fiction and nonfiction works selected as New York Times 10 Best Books of the Year. Her writing has appeared in the Best American Poetry, the Best American Essays, the Norton Introduction to Literature, the New York Times, the New Yorker, and the London Review of Books, where she is a contributing editor. She lives in Savannah, Georgia. I'm exceedingly grateful to Lockwood for joining us here tonight, and also to the people who made her visit possible. Thanks to Megan Sullivan and the Notre Dame Institute for Advanced Studies. Thanks to the Program in Gender Studies, the Lucy Institute, Notre Dame Magazine, the English Department, the Riley Center, and the Institute for Scholarship in the Liberal Arts, all of whom co-sponsored this event, as well as the steadfast work of Paul Cunningham, the program, he's up there, give him a round of applause. The program manager of creative writing and the team at NDIS. Thank you all. And now I would invite all of you to join me in welcoming our special guest tonight, Patricia Lockwood.
Yes, I am a priest. That is correct, Roy. Thank you very much. And I did not know how many tweets I had, so thank you for that as well. I did not think it was that many. This is my first time at Notre Dame. I'm very, very grateful to be brought here. Very, very happy to be here. Very excited, very thankful. I had a misconception about Touchdown Jesus. Everyone's taking me around campus. They're like, you have to see Touchdown Jesus. It's really important. It's a touchdown. It's Jesus. The stadium's right over there. He's making a touchdown. You should be able to see this. It's huge. And I'm looking around and I'm like, where is this freaking touchdown Jesus? I can't see him at all. Eventually I posit that I have some sort of like touchdown Jesus blindness that is affecting my ability to perceive him. No. No. So I was born in Indiana. I was born in Fort Wayne. Woo woo, yeah, bring it. My mom's here.
Yeah.
Sister's here. Sister's here. Bring it from down. Big part for me. Fort Wayne. That's where it happened. But I grew up mostly in Cincinnati, Ohio, where we also had a touchdown Jesus.
No.
Does anyone know about this?
No, it's not real.
Okay. He's not real anymore. You'll find out why. He is a massive, he was, R.I.P., just a huge statue rising out of the ground, totally white, his face in agony, really, raising both of his hands. What church was he attached to? Do you guys remember?
The Solid Rock Church.
All right, we're going with that. Okay, he was hit by lightning. He no longer exists.
He did it.
He burned down. statue of Jesus like bursting out of the earth. And then I see it's like very lovely. Why would you do that? Like when you had the opportunity to make the kind of touchdown Jesus that we had in Ohio. Anyway, so that is my story, Touchdown Jesus. I'm very pleased to be here. I haven't done many readings since the pandemic, so we'll just go slow. We'll just be easy with each other. I'm going to read a little bit from the first half of my novel known as Talking About This. I was glad that Roy read the beginning because it meant that I didn't have to. The premise, if you haven't read it, is very simple. This is a woman trapped in the internet. She is stuck in her computer. And I wanted to read a little bit about the public-facing aspect of it because that's what I'm doing right now. She opened the portal. Are we all just going to keep doing this till we die? People were asking each other. As other days, they asked each other, are we in hell? Not hell, she thought, but some fluorescent room with eternally outdated magazines where they waited to enter the memory of history, paging through a copy of Louisiana Parent or Horse Illustrated. What are you doing? Her husband asked, softly, tentatively, repeating his question until she shifted her blank gaze up to him. What was she doing? Couldn't he see her arms all full of the sapphires of the instant? Didn't he realize that a male feminist had posted a picture of his nipple that day? She had become famous for a post that said simply, "Can a dog be twins?" That was it. Can a dog be twins? It had recently reached the stage of penetration where teens posted the cry face emoji at her. They were in high school. They were going to remember Can a Dog Be Twins instead of the date of the Treaty of Versailles, which, let's face it, she did not know either. This had raised her to a certain airy prominence. All around the world she was invited to speak in what felt like a cloud bank about the new communication, the new slipstream of information. She sat on stage next to men who were better known by their usernames, and women who drew their eyebrows on so hard they looked insane, and tried to explain why it is objectively funnier to spell words wrong. This did not feel like real life, exactly. But nowadays, what did? During these appearances, there entered into her body what she thought of as a demon of performance, an absolutely intact personality that she had no access to in ordinary times. It was not just inside her, but spilled a little beyond. It struck huge gestures off her body like sparks from a flint. Always, when she watched the performances afterwards, she was aghast. Who is that woman? Who told her she could talk to people that way? The problem! She sounded militant, like a lesser-known suffragette. A foreign gnat was stuck in her mascara, and her mouth tasted of the minutely different preparation of coffee that Australians found superior to the latte. The audience looked at her encouragingly. The problem is that we're rapidly approaching the point where all of our dirty talk is going to include sentences like, "Fuck up my dopamine website." In Bristol, the sunset dripped from a honeycomb. "This is your contribution to society?" a man asked, holding up a printout of the Can a Dog Be Twins post. Yes, she beamed. She wanted to explain that she had also popularized the concept of a sealing wax manicure, and that this had paved the way for a 1776 core, an irony-based aesthetic where people adopted various visual signifiers of the founding fathers. But he had already turned away in disgust, tearing the printout in two as he went. Afterward, a boyish figure stood in line to see her. He waited till the very end. "I used to read your diary," he confessed, when it was finally his turn, and tears sparked in her eyes instantaneously. The diary she had written before anything had ever happened to her. The diary where she used to make the sort of jokes that would get people fired now. "What was your name?" she asked, and he told her, and a mundane ecstasy began to rush in her veins. His had been one of her very favorite lives. She remembered it in the minutest detail. The pints after work, the rides back and forth on the train, his search for ever spicier curries, the imagined dimness of his apartment with its crates of obscure records, and the green waving gentleness of it all. She stood up and held him. She could not help it. He felt as breakable as a link in her arms. "My space was an entire life," She nearly wept in a gift store in Chicago, and the whole audience conjured up the image of a man in a white t-shirt, grinning over his shoulder, and a private music began to autoplay for each of them. And it is lost. In Toronto. The man she talked to so often in the portal began to speak out of his actual mouth, which produced the modern tone incarnate. I'd been putting my balls online for a while. I'd post regular pictures in my garage or kitchen or whatever, with increasing amounts of ball in the background. She thought, the first necessity for this conversation is that I do not ask, why would you do that? I take it for granted that at some point in the course of human events, you will see a reason to put increasing amounts of your balls online. She glanced down at his feet. He was wearing cowboy boots, to be funny, as he sometimes posted pictures of himself in a 10-gallon hat with the caption, Cowboy. He was one of the secret architects of the new shared sense of humor. The voice she was hearing in this place, intimate, had spread like a regional fire across the globe. And one night I went to a bar where a bunch of posters were meeting up. And a dude walked up to me and handed me a business card that had, I've seen your balls printed on it. He didn't say a single word. Then next to him, right on cue, his friend puked into a trash can. And I thought to myself, nothing will ever be funny in this way again. The food came and it was disgusting because they had ordered the worst thing on the menu on purpose to be funny. You could write it, you know, she said, leaning forward into a wind. Someone could write it, but it would have to be like Jane Austen, what someone said at breakfast over cold mutton, a fatal quadrille error, the rising of fine hackles in the drawing room. Pale, violent shadings of tone, a hair being split down to the DNA. A social novel. She looked at his profile and saw him as the blazing endpoint of a civilization. Ships on the Atlantic, the seasickness of ancestors over a churning green, and the fact that he looked just like his son, whose pictures he sometimes posted. And if someone doesn't, she thought, how will we preserve it for the future? How it felt to be a man around the turn of the century posting increasing amounts of his balls online. On the way out, in a haze, she remembered she had seen some of those pictures herself, a long time ago, in between glimpses of other things. But the moment to mention it had passed. He lit a cigarette, and as she took one from him, to be funny, she said, they're getting it all wrong, aren't they? Already when people are writing about it, they're getting it all wrong. Oh, yes, he said, exhaling gently through his nostrils to be funny, in a tone that meant she was getting it wrong, too. That's from the first half of the book. And rather than read from the second half, I thought that I would read a little bit something about adaptation. So Pre-Study, we were adapting that a little bit during the pandemic for Amazon, but it was not picked up. And No One Is Talking About This was also optioned. If you've read No One Is Talking About This, you're like, what? Like, how are we gonna make a movie about that? But this person who the genius detectives of Notre Dame might be able to figure out who it is, this person had an idea for what it might look like. The title of this is Shakespeare's Wife. Bells ringing for anyone. All right, it'll come. A warm afternoon in December, and Shakespeare's wife was asking to see me. She wanted to buy my brain, but how to explain that it was no longer worth anything? Someone had texted me the wrong time, so I walked into the corner restaurant 5 minutes late, rehearsing her alias, which meant something in Greek. Wisdom of the fat little wine god, maybe? The maitre d' had no idea what I was talking about, and instead led me to a small glass greenhouse outside, where I began to burn like a prism, till she appeared in front of me lit from behind, saying, I thought we might be in different places. She took me to a back table, where she had been serenely overlooking a dumpster full of mannequin parts. I can't remember the last time I had 20 minutes to myself, she said. It made me realize that what I really need is an office, where presumably the dumpster full of mannequin parts would be moved for her contemplation. Thank you. said, I know when people are going to die. Regarding her past lives, she knew only that she was a gentleman who had been murdered. I can feel the tip of the knife pressing into my back. But you, she said, pointing a finger at me, are not a baby like you think, but something very old that is living a human life for the first time, like a mountain or a stone. Late in life, she had finally unlocked the secret to her dancing. She wasn't using her left heel. Oh yes, I said, I know all about that. My dancer friend tells me I make too many triangles. She nodded as if that were a well-known pitfall, and both of us turned to the dumpster then, where legs kicked in a free chorus line. She was dressed as an equestrian, and I was dressed as a female centaur. Our turtlenecks were so total that it was a wonder either of us could breathe. We sipped espresso and agreed that if we were young now, we would be both agender and poly. I would be everything, she said with emphasis, looking out the window. While she was distracted, I scrambled 6 huge bites of omelet into my mouth. She had ordered avocado toast and managed, by some feat of pantomime, to make it smaller without eating any at all. She had unlocked left heel in her body that I didn't even know about. I was having a protagonist problem. I could not move or make anything happen. Were we in a kind of place that would keep going, like a stage? It seemed we would die before ever discussing the thing we had come there to discuss. Adaptation, I thought, like a writer or an animal. I had written down our first conversation months ago, so I'd be sure to remember it. Everything about it down to the pauses. Straightforward reportage of a conversation with Shakespeare's wife, I called it, and a violet scarf tied around her neck, neatly holding both of our heads on. She talked about the center path. She said that last night she had gone to a rave that started at 6 p.m. The bouncer told her that she was too early. She told me she pictured the first half as a rave, with music thumping and huge screens. She said she thought there should be an arc where everyone in the world was following a story about an animal, perhaps an animal in grief, a baby elephant in Kenya who keeps returning to the same site. She said she was a physics freak and mentioned fractals. She said that she and Jared Leto are both you can never step in the same river twice actors. She liked the bit about the name tag. Was she born as Shakespeare's wife? She liked the bit about the vagina egg, and she said that she had tried to put a storyline in her current show about famous actress made of vegetables, reaching in to adjust her vagina egg, but legal refused to clear it. That was pretty funny, I thought. Did she play you techno? My husband asked afterwards. She played me techno. She said, here's what I think about religion. Hey man, people are just trying to get closer to God. She connected to the material, she said, because, and here she turned to show me a painting of a butterfly sitting on a Corvette. The Corvette must have been her body, classic red, but it seemed like a secret to hear why the butterfly was black. What I had written seemed like a secret too. The book was unfilmable. We both knew that, of course. It really couldn't be done. There was a baby who needed to be born in it, who could not be depicted. But she was so brave. She made her voice so strong and swinging as she explained how we would do it. It's simple. We build. My heart rate, when I checked it later, dropped to 48 beats a minute. At the end of the conversation, like pregnant women, we both had to pee at the same time. Children who were born and children who are not born. I sipped more espresso, became temporarily alive, and felt a brief pang in my lower belly for the man who was competing with Shakespeare's wife to buy my brain. He looked kind and spent and sad, like a vegetarian vampire. He had never staged a play before, but he said to me, I see it. There were ways to do the baby on stage, a light behind a white sheet, for example. A Caldermobile of stars and lucite organs. A French shadow puppeteer, 98 years old, about to expire and take all his secrets with him. And to hold her? We could hire the best actress in the world, he told me, laughing. Or you could do it. I had been picturing something different. Me as the god in street clothes, Joan Didion with a carton of soup between rehearsals. But for a moment, it seemed possible. A spotlight in the center of the stage, white hallways of the hospital, scattered cries, the nurse named Janet, me walking slowly toward the prism that was burning in the glass greenhouse,
lifting it away from the monitors and into my arms. "It's just that I see it," he said to me, almost frustrated, rubbing the thinking lines in his forehead. "Sometimes that happens. I read something and I see it." I knew what he meant. You were reading and suddenly the play was on its feet, an organism with head, heart, hands, lust, thirst. People in black moving mountains back and forth, quick changes in the wings, the heave of red velvet, and suddenly, Lady Hamlet holding up her own skull on stage. We get the best actress in the world, or you could do it. And once wasn't enough. Every night. Every night. "Or you could have been a river," Shakespeare's wife said now, downstairs in the bathroom of the restaurant, as we were peeing next to each other in adjacent stalls. She was being polite because I went for such a long time that it started to seem like I would never stop, a thing that I was famous for among people who knew me. Jared Leto would go crazy. He would step and step and step. "What are you afraid of?" she had asked me above, as someone must ask before you are born again. 2 hours had passed and I still hadn't answered. Holding it up, every night, having it all happen again, and to me. Shakespeare's wife startling awake with her secret knowledge, and Shakespeare lying next to her going, "What? What?" We walked out of the bathroom, where I had been a river, and up into the sunshine. I carried the stone she had given to me, which claimed to connect heaven and earth. I passed the dumpster, where the legs were unlocking their left heels, where the hands were raised in gesture, and the great white heads were glowing. And a tenderness overcame me for the ones who played us on the stage of the world. I could let go, I thought, and let someone else say my lines. I could let someone else wear my clothes. Not a baby like I thought, but something very old, living a human life for the first time. This morning, I'm like, what am I going to read? I'm going to read you Bal Guy. This is a recent essay I wrote about my husband almost exploding on an airplane over the Atlantic Ocean. So if there's anyone who doesn't like stories about people exploding or bowels or anything like that, you are free to leave now. But the rest of you, I know you're going to love it. Bal Guy. It was a perfect day, and we paid for it. Out the ass, I wrote in my notebook later, before deciding to reject the easy joke. I was a tasteful person now, having passed through the refiner's fire. May 8th. We were in LA, and the jacarandas were blooming. The city, from our hotel room, looked like a heat map of itself. Everyone describes the jacarandas, but my husband was seeing them for the first time, in that almost blue intensity that floats low, a leap out of other color. Possibly he was describing them to himself, but if he found the right words, I will never know, because he understands what I do not, how to keep things to himself. David Sedaris had invited me to read that night before his event at UCLA, but before that we had the whole day. We took a car first to Venice Beach so that Jason could pay homage to Arnold Schwarzenegger. Remember when he says that he feels the pump and it's like coming all over his whole body? He asked wistfully. Then we rode to Santa Monica, where we decided on sudden impulse to ride the Ferris wheel. Before we climbed on, a teenager tried to take our picture. Confused as I always am in such situations, I froze. "Do you have to pay for it?" I asked. "You do. You always have to pay." It was Mother's Day, so everyone else handed over their money while we passed through the line and into our swaying seats like ghosts. But now I wonder what the picture would have looked like, what evidence it would have constituted afterwards. The great gear began to turn. We rose backwards with the Pacific Ocean behind us. I looked at him. "Oh my God, I'm afraid of heights," I said. At the exact moment he gasped, "I think I'm afraid of this Ferris wheel." Every revolution seemed like a year. "It lasts this long?" we kept saying, clutching each other. "It's going around again?" "But babies are on it, like life. It must be safe," he said. The sky was a whole jacaranda, risen up. A cage along my spine carried a shaking passenger to the top. That night, after we had both read, I sat next to David and we signed books. People brought him Ziploc bags, books by Hugh's father, back scratchers made out of alligator feet. Hands, paws. A lesbian had handled a piece of fragrant wood, which I breathed from deeply as our signatures got looser, and which later permeated the whole of my suitcase. It is an outpouring. These gifts are given in exchange for something that is not yours to begin with, and that you hand out to the crowd like $100 bills. But sitting next to him, as the cold air came in great cubes at the open door, it felt fine to write about your life. The next day, 30,000 feet over the Atlantic Ocean, 8 hours into the flight from LA to London, it happened. Something is very wrong inside me, Jason told me on his way back from the bathroom, bending over my row with his face white and his arm held rigid over his lower abdomen. Secretly, I thought it might be the world's hardest fart. We had, in collaboration, eaten a whole head of cauliflower and an 8-ounce portion of tuna before boarding the flight. Out of what now seems a kind of shared death wish, a suicide pact in a room where there were only vegetables. It might surprise you to know that I'm not good at emergencies. I'm not the person who barks, "Get my husband to the hospital in a foreign country, even though he might just have a fart trap inside him, stat!" Nor am I capable of directing a stewardess named Poppy to land a plane. Where does it hurt? I asked finally, aware that this was something I should do. "Don't worry, the appendix is on the left side," I assured him, bent over him like the world's worst nurse. In the airport, I felt myself for the first time in our lives rushing him. He passed like a piece of paper through customs, bracing himself on our bags. In the hired car, he was on all fours like a horse trying to give birth. If I concentrated, I could almost see the hoof emerging from him. His forehead was clammy and his hands were cold, and he was making sounds that later would be identified as words of a recognized language. But it wasn't until he started saying, "I don't know what to do, Trisha. I don't know what to do," that I understood he had put himself in my hands. "Where's the nearest hospital?" I asked the driver. 20 minutes later, we pulled up at Charing Cross. "I cannot sit down," Jason whispered as a man abandoned his ambulance with its doors open and ran to bring him a wheelchair. There were no stretchers to be had, so we had to fold him down into it with another loud syllable of the language. His eyes, tracking back and forth, seemed to be seeing something else, terrible and horizontal, a red step where figures were being wrestled down to the ground. On intake, when they asked what his pain level was, he said 70, not bothering to clarify the scale. It seemed both true and obvious in that instant that 70 was the worst number for pain. I sat on my suitcase and waited and waited. Eventually a nurse came to tell me that it was almost certainly appendicitis, a sitcom illness that no one in real life ever seems to have. They would operate, but I could not stay because of COVID protocols. God, he was saying mindlessly when they ushered me back to say goodbye. Jesus Christ. Can you help me? Can somebody please help me? I gave him his phone and his glasses, said a bewildered "I love you" that would never have held up in the event of anyone's death, and was escorted out by one Dr. Khaled, who assured me that an appendectomy only took 15 minutes. He made an eloquent gesture of an airy shape being plucked up and out. "I would be better off at the hotel," he said. "Ah, you're too delicate," he observed, as he helped me to the curb with our 4 bags. "You should play sports." If anything like this ever happens to you, pray that you find yourself in the care of a hot Italian ex-Marine Uber driver named Claudio, who will get you to your hotel, help you with your bags, and distract you the whole way with fatherly stories of his time on naval ships, trading uniforms with American seamen to see who was more handsome in them. Halfway through the ride, I looked down at my phone and saw that Jason had texted me a picture of his face turned in profile, having just thrown up something green into a bedpan. This was either one of his little tricks or else the last image I would ever see of him. "Oh, Claudio!" I found myself wailing from the back seat. If this pronunciation is correct, it was on purpose. If not, it can never be explained. Spurred on either by the urgency of my tone or the more general danger I posed the Italian language, Claudio sped on. In the hotel room, alone with our bags, I began to see it as if I were there. Why haven't you given him morphine? The doctors asked the nurses as soon as they saw Jason, as soon as they heard him. A circle of doctors and specialists who had gathered at his bedside all agreed that it was his appendix, except for one hero who will henceforth be known as Bowel Guy. When the others said appendix, Bowel Guy shook his head. He's making the bowel sound, he explained. When you hear it, it's always the bowel. They continued to investigate. A man came into the room, Jason texted me, and, quote, extensively groped my penis and balls. They rushed him in for a CT scan, and when the results came back, it transpired that Bowel Guy was right. There was no appendix, either ruptured or on the verge. His bowel had folded on itself in a way that the doctors had never seen before. Book bowel! Book bowel! One man ran back and forth, exclaiming. He was a medical student and wanted desperately to have invented a new kind of bowel. But the older residents cautioned him to be precise. It is hard to invent something new that the body does. The actual title of what was happening to him was cecal bascule, a rare kind of intestinal obstruction where the cecum flops closed instead of twisting and creates a volvulus. In these cases, the bowel generally ruptures within 5 hours. We'd gotten him there within 4.5. Almost by chance or whimsy, it appeared now like spores carried by the wind. If the plane had had to taxi, if we had gotten stuck in customs, if I had been sent to the rejects line by that mean Irish guy like last time, there's a specific kind of passport dyslexia that renders me unable to put it through the scanner the right way. Against my better judgment, I looked up cecal bascule and saw something like a dark haggis, lying on a table as if it had been born, and then shut my eyes to all research forever. Emergency surgery was the only option. Oh my God, I thought when I heard, but he's completely full of Lebanese food. They were going to open him up and find a shawarma. Depending on what they found, Lebanese food, they might have to remove his entire colon. He called briefly, talked me through it, and spoke of fatality rates and colostomy bags. Even if the surgery went well, he would have to recuperate in Charing Cross for at least 3 weeks. I heard it in his voice. He saw no future where he ever left that hospital, as I saw no future where I ever left that hotel room. I hadn't slept in 24 hours. Should I take a car back and demand to see him before surgery? What would a capable person do? I know I talked to my sister several times that night, but all that remains is the timbre of her voice and a vision of her blonde hair tucked behind her ear and cascading over her shoulder, like a pale fragment of statue I felt to be attached to the phone. I do not know if I cried. I hardly knew where I was, or whether I was there at all. There was a huge mirror on one wall that I never seemed to appear in. All I kept feeling was my phantom hand shuffling for cards and papers, the twist of the suitcases in my shoulders, as Dr. Khalid told me, "You should play sports." This is sports, Dr. K, I thought, seeing again the red field where figures were wrestled down. I could not be here because I was trying to be there. The body simply goes away when you are trying so intensely to project yourself into someone else. All of it is so unreal and so convergent, I wrote on the hotel stationery, that I feel I am about to invent surrealism too. They were going to wheel him back. They were going to wheel him back. I cursed the patient in front of him for being so internally complicated. The bowel men of London were gathering like magicians to witness his grand opening. And then my phone buzzed on my lap. Tricia, the craziest thing just happened about 10 minutes ago. The book had opened. A nurse had placed a blood pressure cuff on his arm and left it there a moment or two long, while she turned around to do something else. Seconds later, he felt almost a pop, and 90% of the pressure in his abdomen just vanished. The surgeon, on re-examining him, was baffled. If he had never seen a cecal bascule, and no one that Jason interacted with, either then or later, had ever actually seen one, he had also never seen one spontaneously unbascule itself. He recommended that they postpone surgery and watch him overnight. I spent the night on the bowel unit with the other bowel men. Jason texted me pridefully the next morning. Let me tell you about them. One is the Polish guy who just watches really loud Polish Netflix all day on his iPad. One is a sweet, silent Kensingtonite who just stares hopefully out the window toward Kensington. One is a cool dude with dreadlocks who unfortunately makes mummy sounds constantly. I had no idea what this meant, like yummy sounds? But it turned out to be the sounds a mummy makes as he lurches toward you. Every so often the man just went, and one is Vincent, the poor man in agony who had a similar surgery to the one they wanted to do to me. He talks to himself, and about all the rest of us, and about the nurses. He's constantly whispering things in this cool, creepy voice, like the whisper of a mischievous Disney monkey. He says, "Look who's coming." And I hear that Jason's doing better. I have often urged Jason to write a book called 720 Feelings, a collection of largely urogenital feelings that he secretly harbors that are always a surprise to me when they come up in conversation. Quote, "I can't wear a kilt because I wouldn't like to have an open pathway from my balls and anus to the ground. I couldn't have a vagina because I would always be thinking about animals getting in it while I was camping." The bowel unit must have been hell for such a man, I thought. Strangers popping in at all hours to extensively grope you. But no, I'll never care about that again, he said. The Queen could walk toward him snapping a latex glove, R.I.P., and he wouldn't care. Too much had happened to him. They released him the next evening and told him to follow up with the doctor as soon as he got home to Savannah. If surgery was deemed necessary, he could have it at his leisure there. It would not be leisurely, exactly, and it seemed we would require again that last-minute life-saving burst of luck. But that is a story for later. Suffice it to say that he now has a 14-inch scar down the middle of his abdomen, a fear of American nurses named Susan, and, quote, occasional glimpses of the memories of other people who donated blood for my transfusion. Include these last in 720 Feelings. He didn't even call me to meet him in the hotel lobby. He just appeared at the door, looking like he had been replaced by a version of himself that had been through World War II, and said he wished that he could burn his clothes, that he had never wanted to shower so much in his life. No wonder, I thought. Yesterday you gave birth to a horse. You saved my life, he told me, and I couldn't blame him for sounding genuinely surprised. Don't worry, I saw myself saying, bent over him. The appendix is on the left side. Still, carried by either chance or whimsy, he was alive, and more, he was back inside himself, capable, always knowing the thing to do. He spent the next morning drafting an email with the subject line, "What to do if Jason dies." "Marry someone nice," he told me. "But you're the only person I would ever marry who was nice," I said. We spoke of Vincent often, narrating everything that was going on. Maybe narrating everything that happened was part of his bowel sound. "I loved Vincent," he would say, reminiscing about the bowel unit. "I hope he's doing okay." Whispering still all day and all night, talking to himself and about all the rest of us. His story comes again around the corner. I hear that Jason is doing better. "You can write a piece about it," he said, though I hadn't asked. Maybe he saw the piece of hotel stationery on the desk that read, "His eye is on the sparrow, my husband's ass." He folded his hands over his chest solemnly and closed his eyes. Call it Bowel Guy. I believe. So if people have questions, I would love to hear them. I would love to answer them. Thank you for listening. Oh wait, I forgot to do my curtsy. I promised to do a curtsy when I had finished.
So as mentioned, we have some time for questions.
Yeah, we got some question time.
And there's a microphone.
Mike.
really close to the
Super close, so right there, talking to us.
Walk all the way up here.
Yeah.
Maybe genuflect.
Yep.
And then ask a question.
Yeah.
While you formulate,
Please.
how's Jason doing?
Oh. Jason's doing better. He did eventually have to get the surgery that he was going to have to get in London, and that was a little bit tricky. He actually hemorrhaged the night after he had it, even though everything had gone well. But they saved him. American nurses named Susan represent, and he is now doing much better. He can eat some normal foods like chicken McNuggets, one of the main things he can have. He can get in the swimming pool. You know, he can do his little chores. He's doing a lot better. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, no, good. It sounded tricky there. At the
Yeah,
end.
a little bit.
Yeah.
And I wish that he were here. He's always so helpful, so supportive. He travels with me a lot of times when I do my readings. Maybe I read it because I missed him. Maybe.
Yeah.
That would be nice. I'm not that nice of a person, though. Maybe there was another reason.
While we wait for people to
I know
come up
someone
with good
has
questions,
Pranks forward.
Patricia's willing to point people out too.
I know. I can
necessarily.
barely see. Otherwise, I would really be very stern in finding the people who have questions right now. Maybe you have one.
Well, I promised to throw you a softball earlier.
Yeah.
I'm going to do that now. So, no one is talking about this. If you have read it or haven't read it, it's this remarkable sort of
Bifurcated?
Bifurcated?
You said that the other day.
yeah,
Let's go with
bifurcated
it, yeah.
structure.
Yeah.
So the first half is the narrator
Yes.
lost in the internet,
Yes.
and then actually traveling the world
Yes.
as you read.
On the basis just of a single post. She's not a writer. She just posted Can a Dog Be Twins became world famous instantly.
Right. Giving lectures, talking about the internet.
Yes.
And then while she's on this tour, her sister's pregnant
Yes.
and finds out that the baby has Proteus
Producers.
syndrome.
Yes. Yes. Which is very, very rare.
Very rare.
Yeah.
It's a mortal condition.
Just,
Sometimes.
No, not necessarily.
necessarily.
In many cases it is, but there
Okay.
actually is like a Proteus conference that my sister
Okay.
has attended
Okay.
of people who have reached greater ages, which has been very wonderful. But yes, in this case it was determined that it would not be compatible with life. Yes.
So there's this tremendous shift in the novel
Mhm.
from this sort of psychedelic surreal spin through the internet.
Yeah.
Then this once it's like a shrinking, like reduction into the family,
Yeah.
but at the same time this blossoming, this real richness of family coming together around
Yes.
this child.
Yes.
And it's quite moving. But
Yeah.
would you be willing to talk a little bit about how the novel started, how you started writing it? Because I read a first bit of it as an essay,
Yeah. Right.
and then how it became what it became.
Yes. So I just started, I looked at my daily life and I thought that no one was writing about it. That there were very particular feelings, observations, realms of sensuousness, all sorts of things that were not being written down and things that I think were common. That if I said one of them to you, you would recognize that. And I thought that sometimes we were all living our days that way, and that these days were not being put down. We were putting increasing amounts of our balls online, and maybe no one was going to remember in the future what it was like to be us, why we wanted to do that. So I sort of put my antennae, is that what they are? Yeah. I put them up, and I just was observing very closely everything that came my way. And that was just the internet for a long time. And then, yes, a situation very, very, very almost identically similar to what happens to the protagonist in the book happened in my own life with my own family. And that observation, that attention that I had felt almost panicked, like pouring over the world in this ocean that I could not channel in one direction, found its direction, wanted to be only in one place with one person, with just a very few people that I loved. And it just became attention that was concentrated on this child. And I didn't know if that was workable. I didn't know if that was a book. I didn't know that that was a way a book could be. But I just kept doing it. And sometimes that is the signal that you are writing a book, that it is the correct thing to be doing. If you just keep doing it, maybe that is where the book
sister what I was doing. As soon as I started doing it, I said that I can't stop writing about it. I can't stop writing about her. I wanted to be writing about her. It made me feel like I was living with her. And after she passed away, it made me feel like I was extending her life, that I was showing her things that she did not get to see. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to put this down, and I'm going to see, if other people think that this is what I think it is. Sometimes that's just what you have to do.
So, questions?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
great.
Emiliano.
Emiliano.
Your shirt's still open. Is it the same one or different?
Different shirt. Also done today.
Did you cut it today?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, great work. Keep it up. Yeah,
To ask all questions. I have silly questions, and I can start with the silly questions. They're very silly.
So, sure, you
So
can
you're
start with a
guessing.
silly question. Yeah.
All right. Being only 7 years younger than you, do you consider Taylor Swift a contemporary?
I don't, yeah, dangling participle, very bad. I don't actually, because I think that she is more in my sister's generation. This is something I tackle in the book. So I was like the 90s, like big plaid shirt, Doc Martin generation, and then something happened to the world and her name was Britney Spears. And she changed things for all time. She like bifurcated, if we will, this generation. It was no longer, the thing that was my kingdom, over which I ruled. It was like Ugg boots, it was fur vests. I did have a part in the book for a while that was like, there was something very specific that separated my sister's generation from my own, which is that like one day my sister went into the basement and found a rat in an Ugg boot. And it's like, that wouldn't have happened to me. It wouldn't have happened that way. It would have been a different kind of boot, okay? So I can't ever consider Taylor Swift contemporary because she would have found a rat in an Ugg boot, and mine would have been elsewhere. That's why I don't mind silly questions. You can really get at something.
I have a gazillion.
If anyone else has
Yeah,
questions, you
there's
can go for it. We can
yeah,
interrupt
no,
Emiliana because it's like one at a time, but please go.
This is my favorite serious question.
Okay.
So yesterday we hung out,
You did.
and you said when you watch sports, when you do watch sports,
Yeah.
that you like go into the bodies of the players.
Of the athletes, yes.
And on a lot of occasions yesterday, you described this as like kind of an experience that you do a lot, just like going into the
Going
bodies.
to
of
bodies,
people.
yeah.
And I was wondering if you could describe the experience with more detail. Like, how does that start? How does it distinguish from other experiences?
Yeah.
And how someone might try to do the same thing.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so yeah, as a practice, that would be
Yeah.
very interesting. So here is where it happens for me, or where it's most evident. If I'm watching a dancer, if I'm watching White Christmas, and Vera Ellen is tapping, I create a body of her in my mind. If she raises her arm, I feel an arm being raised inside me. There's actually a name for this. It has to do with synesthesia. It's something called like a mirror neuron thing. So some people actually have this, and it's a difference of the brain. And it was always that way for me, that if someone raised an arm, if you came to the microphone, you lifted the microphone, something inside me just picks up a microphone and begins to talk into it. It's a kind of like projection. I make like little bodies out of other people. I experience them very strongly, very intensely. I don't know that other people do. Are you interested in dance?
Yeah.
Okay. I like that. You're like, I'm game. Okay, I'm interested in dance. Yeah, that might be a place to start. I mean, it happens to me with sports, but if you're watching a dancer and you're trying to think about how to do what she's doing, if you're making a body of him or her in your mind, that's one way to do it. And fictionally, it works. I mean, if you project yourself into these bodies, think about how they feel going up the stairs, turning a corner, encountering someone on the street. You'll feel the way they feel. It's a very useful tool. You would think I'd be better at writing fiction or better at making things up, but no, I just have this one thing. I just have this thing where I make tiny bodies. Also, watching the Muppets is a huge problem for me. I can feel everything they're doing, yes. So the Muppets, that's the second favorite. Dancers and the Muppets.
tempted to ask
Go ahead.
more about the Muppets, but it's actually sort of related, and I think it's a good segue. So you read tonight fiction, nonfiction, but they're, you write both and you write poetry, and you talked some in the discussion we had yesterday about making stuff up in fiction. But I guess the question is more about this the synesthetic, or the way reality translates into language. Like, do you feel a difference in writing these different kinds of things?
I do, particularly with poetry. Poetry is bliss. I talk about this. You're a balloon floating up at the very ceiling of yourself. Like, poetry is bliss. Sorry, I have a severe hamburger burn. I should have mentioned this at the beginning, but I know that I'm gesturing a lot with this like hamburger burned hand. I just want to assure you, everything's fine. I'll be able to sign your books. It's just a severe hamburger burn. I really like writing funny essays because that feels more like talking. I can also use quotes from people. So everyone in my family is extraordinarily quotable. Jason's very quotable. I feel like I have all these things that I get to use. Writing something like a novel is very difficult because you're just thinking a novel is long the whole time. You're thinking, how am I going to get to do it? I'm never going to make it. So you're kind of worried about that in the background. It's a little more stressful, I would find, as a discipline. But the part that you read in Priest Daddy, which I think back to sometimes, and I think I've always been writing about this. It's a very synesthetic passage where I don't know that I read correctly. I see things in the words, I feel things in the words, I experience them essentially as objects or as tiny bodies. And I think that that's maybe what makes poetry such a blissful thing for me to write, because that is where you can fully extend that facility, really use that, and have it be floating free of anything else. It doesn't have to be attached to character or even to sense. It can just be in the poem, standing by itself.
One can see that as well in your work. I just lost my question.
It's the bright light. That's
the bright
I'm
light.
telling you, it's the bright light. It makes you lose your. Do you want to hold my little cat?
Yeah. This will be so. Unless there's someone coming up, we'll do this last question.
Okay.
And then. We'll go out and sign.
Yeah, I'm gonna sign some books with my hamburger hand. So get in line and get it while it lasts.
So I keep searching for
It's
this
almost
question.
there.
It's almost there.
Yeah.
It had to do with language, and it had to do with
Fullness of bodies, poetry. The balloon at the ceiling of the mind. Dancers, Muppets.
Muppets.
I can't help you,
Ron. The more words, the further away it goes. Let me ask this instead. What's next?
What's next? That's unfair. Okay, this is true. I am writing a book of short stories. That's what I'm calling them. Actually, Shakespeare's Wife is one of them. So you can see that it has a little bit of the impulse of the shorter fragments in No One Is Talking About This, but it's kind of extended to the length of a short story. It has a kind of symmetry that is a little bit different than what you see in that. So I wrote a bunch of those. I don't know that anyone will ever want to read them. Did anyone figure out any geniuses at Notre Dame figure out the...
You gotta give us another hint. I'm working on it.
Shakespeare had a wife. What was her name? It's her.
No.
It's just,
Yeah. Oh.
yeah. Does that help you understand that story? I was sort of like, what if I just, say Anne Hathaway? No, she was very interested in it, and the sort of pitch that she brought me was very interesting. But then if you meet a person and you sort of talk about translating something or adapting it, that's like an interesting scene in itself. That's something that you also want to write down, I like the person who's like, I'm working on it. What else do you need? Second best bed, come on!
It did did jar loose the question that I
Oh,
was searching
I did
for,
it!
though, which,
Okay.
you had written, so writing a novel is very long, arduous task, but this was not actually your first novel. It's your first published novel.
Yeah.
You've talked about your
Yeah.
previous novel,
Yeah.
The
History of
The History of
Thumbs.
Opposable Thumbs.
This was written at a time that everything was called like the history of something, and I was like, all right, let's go with it. Yeah, my mom found it in a box.
And
It
you
exists.
wrote that whole novel.
Yeah.
Is that something that we'll ever see, that you'll come back to?
No, I'll tell you what that story's about. It's about incest, sisters. Incest is very important in novels. It's very important to put incest in your novels in order to make your novel important. So, it's about incest sisters, present company excluded. And at one point, one of the sisters goes to visit her mom in a nursing home, present company excluded. And the mom is like rabid and she bites her hand, and like the hand becomes really infected. That's it. That's all I know. I don't know what I was doing. I was like looking at novels, I'm like, all right, it's the incest, there's family problems. Well, what's the biggest family problem you could have? It's probably like your mom in a nursing home bites your hand and it's infected. It had to be like amputated in the story. I don't know. I cannot explain to you. Maybe it should be published, like as my juvenilia. Just people are curious. I can tell, like talking about it, they're like, I have to know more about these incest sisters and their gangrenous hands.
At the very least, it sounds like a start.
Yeah, that's right. So that was the first, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, God,
We will, Patricia will be
Yes.
signing books out in the lobby. There's also some dessert and snacks and lemonade. Please join us. Please buy some books, get them signed, and please join me in thanking Patricia Lockwood